Thank you, Jim McNeely, for joining me on my very first interview during quarantine. I want to get into who you are, where you came from. So let's just run down your bio with everybody.
Yeah, let's do this.
You were born in Chicago and moved to New York in 1975 and joined the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra in 1978. How long were you there the first time?
I was with the band. Yeah, I joined in 78 and I left in 84. In 79, that's when Thad left to stay in Copenhagen. So it became Mel Lewis and the Jazz Orchestra. And I stayed with Mel till about into 1984. And then by that time I was working with Stan Getz and we were traveling a lot. And so I thought it was time to hang up my spurs. But I came back. Yeah, I came back in I think it was 86.
You also played with Phil Woods, right?
Yeah, from 90. I think I joined his band in 91, the quintet, and I was with him for about 4 years.
Yeah, and then you also have your own tentet and trio, and you perform solo stuff with various groups around the world.
Yeah.
And do I remember correctly? Your tentet just recently had a performance.
Yeah, it was, well, gosh, now it was almost a year ago. I kind of got the old band together again. We played up at Wesleyan University. And yeah, and I did that. So I hadn't done it in a while, and I forgot how much I enjoyed working with that group and that music. Every time I do it, I really enjoy it, and I kind of get tied up with other things.
It's like a miniature big band.
Yeah. So I call it a big enough band.
A big enough band.
And, yeah.
So your reputation, aside from all the playing, but including the composing and arranging and conducting for large bands, that's all earned you 12 Grammy nominations. And you rejoined the Vanguard as the pianist, but also the composer in residence. You guys put out how many albums of your music?
2. We did Lickety Split was in 1999, I believe, and then.
Do you mean this album?
That one, with the Baton Death March on the cover. I don't know where they got that photo, but and then we did Up from the Skies in 2005. And I misspoke earlier. When I rejoined the band, it was 1990. I think 1995 or 96. Something. Yeah. Not the 80s.
You'd also been with the Danish radio band for a while.
Well, I was chief conductor in Denmark it was a while ago. I joined in 98, and I ended in 2000, right at the very beginning of 2004. And they didn't have a chief conductor really for a while. The whole radio company underwent a big structural change and the job didn't exist. But yeah, now Miho's got that job.
In addition to all the leading and writing, you've been a sideman for several big names, the who's who of jazz. So
Right. Yeah.
Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, Stan Getz, Bob Brookmeyer, Dave Liebman, Art Farmer, Bobby Watson, Phil Woods, and your latest album that you have out is Barefoot Dances and Other Visions.
Yeah, that's with the Frankfurt Radio Big Band. I've been their chief conductor since 2010, I believe. I started working with them in 2002, really, and started to work with them more and more, and I became their artist in residence in 2008, I believe it was. And then maybe it was 2011. I forget when I became the chief conductor, but I've been doing that for some time now.
Lots of traveling, I'm sure. It sounds like.
Yeah, I got to know the Lufthansa schedule pretty well, and at least until the recent situation.
You're also a fabulous teacher, which is part of the reason why I was inspired to do this, because I'm sure many people know you as an amazing teacher, but may not be as familiar with you as an educator.
Mm-hmm.
You taught at William Patterson and currently are still teaching at Manhattan School of Music, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recently I left William Patterson when I moved to Maine. Um, it was I had to give up my position at William Patterson. I'm still involved with Manhattan School of Music. I've been doing lessons with via Zoom, and which I was doing anyway. And so I was kind of, when the pandemic hit, it wasn't much of a switch for me to change because I'd already been doing it that way. What was a drag was I was planning on coming down to New York a couple of times each semester, and that's not happening now.
Well, since we just touched on the quarantine, maybe I'll skip ahead and mention something that you had written on your blog, on your website. It was, I believe, in 2009, and it was a summary of a speech you gave. It's 2 a.m. I'm alone in my music room. There's paper all over the place. The ideas are flowing. I've hit the point where the little fire in my gut has been lit, and I say, damn, I can't wait to hear this. This is going to be great, and there's no one else there, and I don't have to talk to anybody. It sounds like you'd be cut out for quarantine.
Yeah, composer arrangers have been social distancing for a long time. You could have a photo of an arranger from taken last year and taken last night, and they'd look exactly the same. Kind of haggled and hunched over a music writing table, and
That's where my husband is right now.
yeah. Well, of course. I mean, you know what it's like. So yeah.
Outside of music, are there any hobbies that you've gotten into or anything you picked up during quarantine?
No. um, no, not well. I've been trying to read some books. I just finished reading a biography of Debussy, which was really interesting. This guy, I mean, he was an incredible composer, but he spent a lot of time convincing his publisher that, oh, this piece it's almost finished. Don't worry, it's almost finished. And then the author goes on to say there's been no evidence of any work having been even started on this thing. So he was a bit of a hustler too. He could, but yeah, I've been trying to read. I've had a stack of books on my desk for 2 years, and I'm trying to finally get through them. I'm reading a biography of Ravel right now. So, I mean, that's mainly my hobby.
And you studied classical composition at Champaign-Urbana, right?
Yeah, I did. I was a composition major at the University of Illinois back in. I entered there in '67, and then graduated in '75. Those were the wacky late '60s and early '70s. I won't get into why it took so long, but I'm still alive and managed to live another 50 years since then. So, but yeah, I was. They didn't really. They had a great jazz band, big band, and some really terrific musicians around there, but they didn't have a jazz program. And I was a comp major, which enabled me to study not only things like counterpoint and fugue, but I also took some classes. There was a famous ethnomusicologist there named Bruno Nettle. He just recently passed away. And I took a couple of classes with him on African music and Persian classical music. And then, I took a class in ancient and medieval music. I learned about all the old Greek modes and all that kind of thing. So it really broadened my horizons.
You and I met through the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop, and it was, for those of you who don't know, the Composers Workshop is a regular meeting of emerging or developing jazz composers. The focus of the workshop's activity is big band composition. So the purpose is to foster musical growth of these new composers and also create more music for the jazz orchestra. And at the time, I guess it must have been 2008, J.C. Sanford, another trombone player that I had gone to school with in Boston, was booking the band. So the band would get together once a month and we would read through the new compositions of each class of the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop. And you did it for many years. You did it from 91 to 2015. Did you take over for Bob Brookmeyer?
Yeah, he left. That was the impetus for me joining. The way it worked was, Bob and Manny Albam were the first two musical directors, and Bob was more or less the head, and Manny was the assistant. And when Bob left, Manny became the head musical director, and they brought me in as his assistant musical director. Actually, the first year Roger Kellaway was there also, but I think his wife's mother got sick. They were out in L.A., and so they had to move back out to California. So then it was me and Manny for some time, and then when Manny passed away in 2001, I took over as the chief musical director till 2015.
And you work with Mike Holliber, right?
Yeah, Mike Holliber. Micah Benny was there too. Micah Benny, and then Mike, when Mike finally got the job with the Cologne radio band, then Mike Holliber came in.
And that's when I was there. It was you and Mike Holliber. I still do it now, but we do miss your face.
Yeah, well, I felt it was I'd been there 24 years, and I felt like I had said everything I could say, and it was time to get some new blood in the thing. So,
Do you have some fond memories of people that have come through the workshop?
Oh yeah, I think my best memory is all the people that came through that really, in one way or another, really got turned on to composing or got turned into a different direction through it. And I always used to say that I never saw the workshop as me or Mike Holliber in front of the group telling you got to do this. To me, there was a horizontal aspect to the workshop. It was all the members learning from each other, and yeah, I was there, or Holliber was there, but there was as much learning going on among the different members as there was, any kind of transmission of information from me to them. And that to me was my favorite part, was seeing how somebody would come in, and people would come in with different levels of experience and technical knowledge, and some of them would tend to become the stronger voices, and then you'd see other people saying, hey, I'm going to check out what this person is doing, and someone like Joseph Phillips Jr., who was writing this music that was a combination of it reminded me of Steve Reich meets Marvin Gaye meets the big band, and all of a sudden, 3 months or 4 months after he started writing his stuff, people would start writing little repetitive things, like, I'm going to check out what Joe's doing, or to see the way Rufus Reed, when he took early retirement from William Patterson, where he was teaching full time, and he just really blossomed in the workshop. I knew he had written big band arrangements here and there for a long time, but he really got into it. In fact, one night he and his wife came over to our place for dinner, and he brought a score he wanted to look at. So he and I went up to my music room, and Doris Reed took my wife aside and said, how long is this going to last? And Marie, my wife Marie, said, well, what do you mean? She said, he disappears into the studio at night and I never see him again. How long is that going to go on? And my wife said, forget it. It'll keep going on forever. And so to see somebody like the way Rufus, responded to the dynamic of the workshop and blossomed was really, to me, that was the big payoff, to see when certain people would really get into something and really develop.
It's interesting because as a performer, we're playing with people all the time, so we're learning from people all the time on gigs. But when you're composing, you don't have that sort of camaraderie until you get a group like this.
Yeah.
Even just playing the music once a month, I can see how people evolved.
Yeah, that's one of the things I always said about the workshop is that it gets us all out of our individual studios or music rooms and it would get us in the same room once a week talking about what we were doing, and that to me was to provide a meeting place for like-minded composers that was a really important part of it. Just to, going back to that image of the lonely composer at the table, this at least meant that, once a week I had to shave and put down my pencil and go look and act civilized with a bunch of other people. It was good.
We did a good impression of a civilized person.
I did what I could with what I have. But another big payoff with the workshop for me was getting to know Manny Albam the way I did, and seeing how he presented information to the students, and and then to hang out with him. We after every class session, he and I would go across the street and have a drink, and he'd talk about all of his many experiences, and he became like an uncle to me, and I learned a lot from him, just from the hearing the stories and hearing about the scene back in the 50s and 60s when he was coming up.
I've also read that you had a special relationship with Bob Brookmeyer. Didn't you have your rehearsal dinner at his apartment?
Yeah, I met Bob. I forget when I met him the first time. I knew who he was, but he had come back from the West Coast. He was off the scene, recovering with alcoholism, and he came back to New York. And Stan Getz hired him to play with his quartet. He made it a quintet. That was a nice thing for Stan to do, and Stan was capable of doing nice things. He was also capable of just being a whole nother kind of guy too. But and so Bob was playing, and the big breakthrough was when Thad left Mel, and Mel invited Bob to come in as musical director. So that's when I really got to know him, and we had we never. I mean, it was a loose. It was more like a mentor-mentee relationship, not necessarily student-teacher. We'd hang out, and when he moved to Brooklyn, to Park Slope, and a year or two later, I moved into an apartment on the same street, about a block and a half down the street from him. And so we had a rehearsal dinner at his house, and we'd hang out and talk about stuff and music and life and all that. And then he did a tour of Europe. I think it was 1980 with Mel's band, and he was the featured soloist. And so we'd sit together on the bus every day and talk about scores and things that the band was playing. So I learned an awful lot from Bob, and he was a big help to me. I mean, frankly, so much of my career the last 30 years has been involved with European big bands, and none of that would have happened without him. I owe him a lot.
My junior year at NEC, Maria Schneider was going to be the guest artist, so Bob came in to rehearse the jazz ensemble. It was the only time I got to work with him, but he was like a giant teddy bear.
Yeah.
I don't know how he was in his earlier life, but he was a teddy bear at the time. And he called me Jenny, which I absolutely hate. But I was like, it's Bob. I guess it's okay. He was adorable. Every student of his that I know loved him, and you have that in common with him. I talked to quite a few students of yours.
Uh-oh.
Everybody loves you.
Okay. You know the right people.
Well, I talked to several musicians I work with in New York about your teaching and mentoring. One of them is Quinton Natchoff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's a saxophone player that writes for a lot of diverse ensembles. He's got an album out. It was nominated for some Juno Awards.
Yeah.
And Quinton stated that you're really good about thinking about the big picture of compositions and how sections relate to each other. Your concept of coming up with a few words that describe the character of the piece before starting to sketch it out is really helpful to stay focused on what the composer wants to say without getting lost in technical details. And it's also helpful to keep referencing back to that idea in order to make sure the intent is consistently there.
Yeah.
He said you teach people to think of each piece as a whole, similar to a play or a novel, with recurring characters, and how a character can be developed and changed from the beginning to return later as a changed individual because of what happened in the interim. And due to your many accomplishments as a performer, in addition to composing and arranging, you also can draw on personal experience when trying to teach information, important information about playing in an ensemble, writing for an ensemble, such as ranges and how ridiculous it might be to write very high flugel soli, as I was told you may have done in the Vanguard.
Yeah.
He ended by saying you're one of the best teachers because you have a way of not forcing your taste on whoever you're working with.
Yeah, well, he's a great musician, and yeah, he would just once in a while come to my place for a lesson, and he'd be working on, some huge piece, a concerto or something and his one thing that his language, he had this very, what to me seemed very complex kind of compositional language, but yeah, the whole thing of the one or two word idea of the piece to me is important. It's kind of the kernel of the piece, of what you're trying to say. And so I think a lot of times when people would come to me for a lesson, they were really tied up with the minutiae of, I've written 8 bars. What do I do now? Well, I don't know what to, and you got to step back and think, what am I doing here? What am I creating? So there's that famous quote. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a good quote from Michelangelo that somebody said, how did you do your sculpture of David? He said, I took a piece of marble and I started to chip away everything that didn't look like David. So that's part of, like you've got this universe of sound available to you, and you've got to decide what shouldn't be there so that what I'm trying to say emerges. And so the thing there is, first you got to figure out what you're trying to say. So I think that's important. I'm glad Quinton said that. I mean, that's, I think that's one of the basic things I try to get across to people.
Migiwa Miyajima, if you don't know who she is, she has a big band called Migi Augmented, and she was a finalist for the VMI Jazz Composers Workshop. She also mentioned when she was struggling with something, you were very supportive and encouraging, just to, in general, to let people really let loose composing. Whatever happens, you and the people in the workshop were going to be there to support her and tell her if she was going down the wrong path. And that's huge, because any professional musician trying something new can get really uncomfortable and it becomes very scary. So to have somebody there to catch you and make sure you're not making a fool out of yourself, it's really important.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the purposes for me, for any educational situation, is to allow people to make mistakes and learn from them. A lot of times in the workshop, people would come in with stuff in their scores, and I'd think to myself, wow, this probably is not going to sound very good, but I didn't want to say to somebody, oh, don't do it this way. So I would say, look, I think this is problematic here, but don't take my word for it, because I don't know what you're hearing. And so go ahead and write it this way, and then at the reading session, see what you think, because that's part of the process of hearing what you wrote and then honestly asking yourself, does that sound the way I thought it was? Am I saying what I wanted to say here? Not, oh, Jim McNeely says you shouldn't do this. That's not a reason not. In fact, there are some people who would take that as a reason to do it. So I usually wouldn't say, unless it was really horrible. But most of the time there'd be things that I'd say, well, this is kind of interesting. I don't know if it's going to work. So I'd say, try it. And there were times I'd hear it at the reading session and I'd make a little note to myself, bass clarinet and flugelhorn up in that register is pretty nice, and I wouldn't normally have thought to do that. So I learned from people trying things. But you've got to try things. You don't just you don't learn by trying to please a teacher. You learn by trying stuff yourself. And then the teacher, then the job of the teacher is to say, well, how'd that work out? And you say, well, yes or no. And well, then let's talk about what were you trying to do? What are some alternatives,
Something that Miho Hazama, which if you don't know Miho, she has her Grammy-nominated band M Unit, and she's written for many, many people. And I've worked with her under a number of situations, from her conducting to her performing her music. But she loves the concept that you teach about every single note needing to have a meaning.
Yeah, it's got to be there for a purpose. A sentence needs the proper words to get across the meaning of the sentence, no more, no less. And then the same thing with music. The notes, they have a theoretical meaning in the structure, but they also have a grammatical meaning and an emotional meaning. They've got they mean something. You're not just putting notes on a page. Even when I talk about notation with students, it comes to the point where I say, when you put an F on a page, think about what you're telling this person. Excuse me, Jennifer, on the first beat of bar 36, I want you to play an F down there for one beat and then rest. Not this F and not that one. There's every note is full of information and meaning when you're writing on the page, and sometimes people lose sight of that. They're just putting dots on the page. It's
As a player, I've sometimes gotten into some discussions about the choice that some composers make, and hopefully I'm not too annoying, but I have a long-standing argument with the leader of one of the bands I play in, Darcy James Argues Secret Society. He has a section where I am in a bucket mute in the pedal range,
right,
and the entire band is open and playing fortissimo. And I told him, I said, Darcy, it's like trying to swim with cement blocks on my feet. And he's like, this is the sound I want. And he's right under the conditions of us all being mic'd. Of course, someone can always turn me up, but one day I'll win an argument with him, maybe. Today's not going to be that day. But ultimately, it's my job to just do what he tells me to as a player in a band, and ego shouldn't become a part of it.
Well, yeah, certainly if everyone's individually mic'd, and certainly in a recording situation, there are certain things that might carry the day. With the bass trombonist with the Frankfurt Radio Band, he just retired a couple of months ago. And there were times I'd have him down way at the bottom in a bucket mute. He just wouldn't bother to put the thing on. And then I'd realize after a while, he's not playing, he's playing it open and it sounds fine. So, there are times when I've used that line. Well, that's what I want, or that's what I'm hearing. And then I realized, maybe not. Maybe, you think you're hearing that. I'm not speaking for Darcy. I'm just speaking for myself. And that's one thing that came up quite a bit in the workshop. And there were usually, the trombone players like Scott Reeves or JC would be there. And someone would have all these bucket mutes happening. And Scott especially, he'd always say, you can just tell us to play soft. We don't have to have. And I find myself, I use buckets less and less. It's got to be a very special circumstance to use them. But that came from experience and really asking myself when I'd hear them, is that the sound I really wanted?
I'll give you a little insight. My husband does not ever write mutes in the trombone because if it's his gig, he doesn't want to have to carry the mutes to the gig.
That's a great excuse. That certainly makes sense, especially bucket mutes. I mean, who's got room for a bucket mute, trombone bucket mute?
Something that Stephen Feifke talked about, that you have some great ways to describe how to implement certain techniques. Like he talked about your idea of the shadow and the shimmer.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an orchestration idea that I have. I'm sure there's a more elegant way to describe it. And maybe when I'm in reading this biography of Ravel, I'll find the words to do it. But there's in orchestrating a melody with more than one instrument, to me, there's the core sound, and then that's the main octave that we're going to hear the thing in. And then there's the shimmer is usually an octave higher. Sometimes I might put a harmony mute a fifth above. But you're tweaking the overtones of the core sound. And then the shadow is usually just an octave below, either a trombone with a cup mute or sometimes a tenor saxophone, play. Rich Perry has a wonderful way of playing a line on the tenor because he's one of the, and I know a number of tenor sax players like this, he refuses to even go near a clarinet. I don't think he can spell the word. And so, of course, over the years, Thad wrote all this music that has clarinet in the first tenor parts. And he's got a way of playing them with a really soft embouchure. It's wonderful, and to the point that sometimes I'll hear some of these charts played with the original clarinet being played, and it sounds funny to me. And I'll realize, wait, I'm used to Rich playing it with that way that he plays it, the clarinet sound on the tenor. But so there's the core sound, and then the shimmer and the shadow.
Gary Simoleon does that with bass clarinet too.
Yeah.
I have seen him play bass clarinet before. I
remember one night, for some reason, this was years and years ago, and he had a bass clarinet set up on a stand next to him, and John Moscow was on the microphone. He said, and on the baritone saxophone, Gary Simoleon, what is it? Is there a contractor in the house you're trying to impress? Because I've never known him to play. But I mean, when you play the baritone the way he does, you don't have to play bass.
I love him.
Yeah.
The final person that I talked to about you was Chris Davis.
Oh.
The amazing Chris Davis.
Yeah.
She calls you a master of everything that you do. And she talked about her first lesson with you. And she was really nervous. So you said you were going to go make coffee, and you were gone for about 20 minutes, but you were listening to her through the floor.
Yeah. That was in our house in Montclair. The music room was up on the third floor, and it had been an attic, and the woman that owned the house before us had knocked down some walls. So it was this big open space. And I'd show the student into the room, and I'd say, just play relax, play the piano. I'll be downstairs. And sometimes what I would tell them I'd make coffee, but I'd just stand outside I'd close the door and just stand outside And they'd be, I'd hear all this wonderful music, and I open the door and they'd stop. And I said, "Oh, keep going." No, that was just something and there's the sound of somebody they're not even warming up. They're just playing the piano, and it's up there to me with the sound of a symphony orchestra warming up on stage before the concert begins. This is wonderful, subtle sense of abandon and just this cloud of sound that if you tried to write it, I mean, if you told them, okay, in this section of the piece, play as if you're warming up, they'd be so self-conscious they wouldn't know what to do. But yeah, these students I'd hear all this wonderful stuff coming out, and then I'd open up the door and it would shut down. And I'd try to say, well, let's keep that atmosphere going. Just because I'm in the room doesn't mean you shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. At this point, I'm going to veer a little off course to get to something selfishly about me. And I want to bring up that you wrote an amazing tune for my band, Bonegasm.
Yeah.
It's called Lowball. And you were my big ask for my album. And luckily for me, you were recovering from knee surgery, so you had the time to write for us.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't think I ever told you. When I started the band, I wanted it to become a vehicle for composers to rediscover the trombone. It seems like trombone's kind of the redheaded stepchild of the jazz community. It's always the last instrument added to ensembles, unless the leader is a trombone player.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of run it like a classical ensemble and commission people to write for trombones with rhythm section, put them in a box and see what they could do.
Yeah.
Like I said, you were my big ask. And I know you had written for the same type instruments before, because you've written for the American Saxophone Quartet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like writing for the trombone specifically, and writing for the same instruments, because it seems to be one of the harder things to do.
It is, at least with the saxophones. A typical classical quartet is soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone. So you've got big differences in, this note can be played on all four of those instruments, but on the soprano, it's way down at the bottom, and on the baritone, it's pretty high up on the top. So that the note itself has a different character with each of the four saxophones. With a trombone, it's not so much that way. There's, differences in bore and the bass trombone being more conical and all that. There are differences, but what you don't have is the ability to double with something else that's not a trombone. So one thing that helps is if you know the individual players, and being familiar with John especially, and with you, at least I knew the top and the bottom. I had an idea about what those sounds were going to be like, and you just find that no matter what size group I've ever written for, there's many times there's a point where you say, I wish I had a blah blah blah, because there's just one thing I want to do here that, I've written stuff for a symphony orchestra a long time ago and thinking, I wish I could have 3 piccolos, and they only had 2. And so there's always some point where you're wishing you had something other than what you had. Now with the trombone quartet, you end up, when that comes up, you have to say, well, sorry, it's not there. So you have to come up, be creative with a sense of orchestration. And that's a little more difficult when it's especially 3 of the exact same instruments, pretty much, and one of kind of a little lower version of the same instrument. So but after a while, then you just say, I just got to write this thing. So just shut up and write, and I don't really concern myself with it that much, because there aren't that many things you can do. You can stick bucket mutes on them, or some kind of mute combination. But otherwise, I still try to, think about certain things as being compact and certain things spread out, and certain, the density of what I'm doing, like 2 people tight here and 2 people tight down there, or 3 over 1, or different combinations. And one of the things I try to do is get more of a sense of independence of the lines, and not write so much like a trombone solely kind of style writing. I try to keep it more independent.
That's what I've noticed as I've come up through the years in various big bands. The individual writing for bass trombone specifically has gotten a lot more independent. And I think my first experience with it was in junior college. I was playing Bob Mintzer's tune in the 80s. It was the first time I really noticed it. It's been great for my instrument to get a chance to shine in a different way in the big band. And many composers now have me playing more often with the bass or the baritone sax than with the trombone section.
Well, I tell my arranging classes, for me, you, meaning you, Jen, you occupy 2 different roles in the band. Sometimes you're the 4th trombone, sometimes you're the bass trombone. So if I'm doing little voicings like, that's 4th trombone stuff. If it's that's bass trombone stuff, or even just roots down below the section. So and when I'm writing for a big band, or even I guess when I was writing for Bonegasm, with you, I was thinking, okay, which hat are you wearing here now? Are you the 4th trombone up in the section, or are you on your own down on the bottom? And I like to move between one and the other.
Was there anything that came easy, or did you learn anything along the way? I mean, it's been 2 years since you wrote it, so.
Yeah, I remember there's a melody. I was thinking of a sandwich. I forget the exact melody, but John and I think the 3rd was in octaves. Yeah, and then the other 2 voices were doing something inside the sandwich.
Yeah.
And I was just curious as to how that was going to sound. And when you sent me the mix, I thought, oh, okay, that sounds good. I tried, I think, several combinations, because I've written for the Frankfurt band. I've written a few things, just 16 bars of trombone solely, where I do this also when I write saxophone solos. I don't just keep it in block harmony. I try to think more linearly sometimes, and so I've done that with the Frankfurt band with the trombone section. So I tried to take a little bit of what I've learned from them and apply it to Bonegasm, and then after I wrote Lowball, I've tried to apply some of that to what I do for the Frankfurt guys.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I do like the analogy of the sandwich. So the next time we play your tune, I'll have a new story to tell.
So now you have to decide which. So you're the filler. So what are you going to be there?
Meat.
Okay.
You started writing for big band in high school, and you studied classical composition in college, mm-hmm. and began writing for the Vanguard during your first tenure there.
Yeah.
I know Blue Note was the 3rd tune you wrote, and it's recorded on the album Live at the Village Vanguard. Yeah. You previously called the first tune you wrote dreadful. What was it?
The first one is called None But. One T, B-U, none, N-O-N, I should declare, N-O-N-E-B-U-T, ... I was thinking of None But the Brave, and I thought, well, I'll just make it None But. If you spell it differently, it takes on a whole new meaning. So I brought it in, and it was overwritten. That was back in the days when, I was still, if I'm honest with myself, what I was doing, I was writing piano music and transferring it to a score pad, so there'd be, I was just thinking of ranges. Oh, this is in the range of da-da-da, so I'll give it to them. And there was, I'm sure there was some kind of line like that, and thinking, oh, that's all in the range of the trumpets, I'll give it to them. It's some of the typical, although I had written big band music in college, this was still this kind of what I call typical piano player's first big band chart kind of mistake, where this thing you can whip out, without batting an eyelash on the piano. Say, oh, that's in the range of these guys. I'll give it to them. So I just remember it was horrible. But Bob was encouraging about a couple of sections. He said, that section there, I looked at it, it shouldn't sound good, but it does, and the main thing he said was write another one. Wow. So, coming from him, that was pretty cool. So that's when I wrote Las Cucarachas Entran, which means the roaches check in. It was taken from back in the 80s. There was the Black Flag Roach Motel, and the Spanish subway signs with Las Cucarachas Entran, pero no pueden salir. The roaches check in, but they can't check out. So I was writing this kind of a Latinish tune, and I'm trying to think of, I think I was riding the A train one day and saw that sign. Okay, I'll use that. And that was a little better. We played it on tour, and but there were things I didn't like about it. But then the band actually recorded it about 6 years ago. They did, or 7 or 8 years ago, it's live at the Vanguard, on Monday night at the Vanguard. And by that time, I found the score and I sent it to Chris Byers, who put it all into Finale, because I realized what the people had been playing before that were Xeroxes of my pencil copies of the parts. They couldn't read one of the reasons it sounded so bad was they couldn't read it. And all of a sudden we played it one night with the new parts. Wow, hey, this is not bad, and I had this image of the me of 1983 or whatever, and I was patting him on the head saying, kid, you weren't so bad back then. Just having the right, having legible parts is important. Just having the right, having legible parts is important.
That's the hardest thing about playing in the Vanguard.
Yeah.
I've only subbed a couple of handful of times, but the music, there's so much that is not on the page.
Yeah.
And or missing chunks of the page.
I know, it's like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, you try to extrapolate what the rest of the line would be because the last two beats of the bar are missing.
Yeah. In my entire career, that's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do was sub at the Vanguard in New York.
Yeah.
I have massive amounts of respect for people that do it.
At the bottom of the piano book, there are several little shards of paper that is all that's left of a couple of the tunes. If they ever want to play them again, I don't know how there's not going to be a piano part. They just disintegrated. But then, yeah, and then, but then I wrote Blue Note. That was the third one, and that was Mel liked it, and he recorded it. So that was kind of, and by that time I had left the band. Kenny Werner was playing, and they did the recording sessions were from midnight to 6, because number one, all the guys playing shows could do it, and they got a deal. There was I forget the name of the studio. It was on 57th Street. It was right near where the old BMI used to be. And they could get a cheaper rate if they were doing it, midnight to 6. So Mel saved a little money, and I remember I came to that session, and they were playing my chart, and I was sitting in the booth thinking, I really like it in here. I'd rather be in here than out there. There's something about just hearing a band play my thing and, kind of steering the recording process, but not actually having to play the piano. I could concentrate more on the big picture. When you're just playing the piano part, it's still, you got to focus on what you're doing, and it's hard to get a sense of what's going on over the whole band.
That's been something that's been really cool to learn as a new band leader, like how to direct traffic when you can see a mile down the road and you see there's something bad coming, but you're playing, so you have to find a way to relay the information.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, keeping both hands on the wheel. So I can understand why you like it better in the booth.
Yeah, well, and like you or John would know, if you're leading a big band and you're sitting in the middle of the trombone section, the saxes don't even see you, so that's hard. That's why obviously you've got to stand in front of the band. But yeah, it's you get so involved with your own stuff. That's why there are several, I won't say any names, but several really well-known jazz musicians that I've enjoyed their sideman recordings better than the recordings where they're the leader, because when they're the sideman, they just walk in, they'd play through the tunes, they'd roll the tape, and they were relaxed, playing great, and they would, sometimes you had the feeling on their own dates, they're playing their solo, but they're thinking about, I got this to deal with and that to deal with. I wonder how this is sounding. If you're a sideman, you just show up and play. So
some people are even more pleasant when they're just a sideman.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite things that you've said is that you try to hear your music with the same unconnected ears that the other 6 billion people on the earth have, not your own ears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it sounds like to me it goes hand in hand with John Cage's rule of don't create and analyze at the same time. It speaks a lot to me as somebody who came to improvisation late in life, because I was working at a really high level on one hand, and then to go back, not to square one, but maybe to square two, and start over again and listen to myself struggle. That was really hard. So if I were to think of it how you're describing, I would just let myself create. Can you talk more about how you got to that happy place where you allow yourself the space to create?
If you're going to write something, the worst thing we can do is judge it. And, the idea, judge the idea. And the other 6 billion or whatever, how many there are now people in the world, they just hear that, who knows, Beethoven might have thought, oh shit, what's that? That's crap, and if he had judged it and not worked with it, we wouldn't have that symphony. But some of the things that lead to wonderful pieces of music are just these simple ideas that if you're sitting there thinking, now this has to, I'm really going to write a great piece here, or I've really got to impress so-and-so with this, or, oh, that's too simple, or that's stupid. All those things, in the ways we come down on our ideas. I try to hear something come out of my hands in this disconnected kind of way, where I'm hearing it like somebody else has played it. There's people, and I kind of subscribe to this, where, sometimes these musical ideas, we don't invent them. They pass through us from somewhere. We can just come up with these simple ideas fall out of our hands, and then you have to be open to accepting it. And if we put all these conditions when we sit down to write, if we put all these conditions on it from a priori, then you're never going to fulfill those conditions. So you try to just come up with simple ideas that, and just take them for what they are. They're ideas. They're not good. They're not bad. And so that's what I mean by that. Even when I talk with my students about this, they'll say to me, gee, I had a reading session and that other guy's piece sounded really nice, but mine sounded terrible. And I said, I go through the same thing. If I'm in a reading session where there's more than something that somebody else wrote as well as mine, I think that all the time. That piece sounded great. Why does mine sound so crummy? It's because we've developed this internal image of what we think it's going to sound like, or what we're trying to say with it. Meanwhile, this other piece, I'm just hearing a piece of music. I'm hearing just the face value. And chances are that other composer is thinking the same thing about mine. Why does McNeely sound so good and mine sound so dumb? Because of the same thing, So I try to get into the head of the other people in the world, not my head, It's hard to do.
I look at it like it's a lifelong goal. I may not reach it, but hopefully I'll move in the right direction.
Yeah.
Speaking of moving, you've moved to Maine recently and scaled back on some of the work that you were doing. Yeah. Has it helped or hindered you? Have you been able to write more things, or are you still under the gun of a bunch of commissions?
Well, not now. Going back to the P word, the pandemic has changed everything. And I've written, I feel like I'm able now to accept more writing and teaching, requests for lessons, because moving out of the New York area took, at Manhattan School of Music, I was going in, for a while I was going in 3 days a week. And there was a time I was doing 3 days at Manhattan and BMI. And that was really intense, especially the commuting time from New Jersey and all that. I've got more time up here. And the natural surroundings are beautiful. The problem we had I still suffer from this a little bit. My wife and I'll get up in the morning and we've got this picture window overlooking Penobscot Bay, and you make a cup of coffee and you start noodling around on the internet, and all of a sudden it's 11 o'clock and I haven't done a thing yet. Without this pressure of a deadline hanging over my head, I really like it. And I come down here and I tell my wife, I'm just plinking and plunking, so we'll be upstairs and she's in her office. I'm saying, I'm going to go downstairs and plunk for a while. So I come down here, hour and a half, I just write down some ideas, start putting things together, and then I turn it off, and I like that. And I go upstairs and have a drink. So that said, before everything hit the fan, I had a bunch of commissions that were all piling up. And I didn't really want to get to that place. moving up here, but it was, I mean, I was glad to have the work. And now most of those things have been postponed. So all of a sudden I've got time to really dive into them more. I had gotten into this because I was writing so much stuff for the Frankfurt band. I've gotten into this mode of working where I would kind of put things off and then at the last minute just dive in like crazy and feel this, but I loved it. I mean, there's something about that kind of that intensity that really gets me going.
Some people can't function without a deadline.
I know. I mean, Ellington supposedly said, talking about composition, don't tell me about inspiration, just give me a deadline. But, I mean, then it kind of gets into a little bit of, sadomasochism. I can't get excited unless there's this horrible thing that might happen to me. And then I really get going, I've told people, when I was writing a lot of music for the Metropole Orchestra in Holland, and I once had this image that I would walk in one day without the music written, and and they were all very nice people, and so I'd be saying, look, folks, I'm sorry, there was this baseball game. I had to watch it. You'd understand, right? And they're throwing in tubas and rotten vegetables at me, and so that would get me going. I'd turn off the Cubs and get back into it.
So, what is the first thing you're going to do when this is all over?
Oh, well, we can already leave the house. First thing I got to do is get my hair cut.
I've got John's hair twice. Yeah.
Really? Well, now I saw Tony Catlick's on Facebook. Did you see that?
Yeah.
That did not go well. And my wife is afraid that would be her. So
I ordered a pair of scissors off Amazon. And
oh, okay.
Every time I cut John's hair, I get the scissors out and the Band-Aids out. And if it goes poorly, he has a lot of hats.
Oh.
I heard he used to play the clarinet and the sax. I think you need to explain yourself.
Well, I was taking piano lessons. The teacher I had, he taught piano, clarinet, saxophone, and accordion.
Please tell me you played the accordion too.
No, I didn't. I had a friend, my best friend in high school played accordion. He was Italian, so he had to. But I was taking piano lessons, and then I thought, in sixth grade, I thought, I'm going to go to high school, and I want to play in the marching band. And they don't have pianos in the marching band. So I asked them so I started taking clarinet lessons. And then I think I was a freshman in high school. I thought, well, I'm going to take some saxophone lessons too, which I did, and I played a little bit in high school. In college, I played piano with the band, but because I played clarinet, I could read really well. I didn't have a very good sound on the saxophone, but once in a while, like the night before the big band was going to have a 1-week tour, the second tenor player got in a fight and got his 2 front teeth knocked out. So I moved over. I played tenor, and someone else played piano. And so, and I used to try to improvise on the clarinet, but wasn't very good at it. With the piano, it's all that you look. When
all the notes are there.
When you want to go higher, you go to the right, and when you're going to lower, you go to the left. So it was a different improvising. But in college, I got into playing the bass clarinet quite seriously, and people were writing these contemporary chamber pieces for me that had all these kind of extended techniques. It was a lot of fun and a whole nother lifetime. But then I played 6 months with a country and western band, 6 nights a week. And somehow one night I let it slip that I played clarinet. So for about 2 months, every night I had to play Stranger on the Shore and clarinet polka.
Did that cure you of your clarinet habit?
Pretty much. Once I moved to New York, I never touched it again. Although once in a while, Dennis Irwin played clarinet, and we would have these clarinet discussions and talk about Brahms' clarinet sonatas. No, I never really. I've probably played clarinet and saxophone a total of about an hour since moving to New York in 1975. Yeah.
A few years ago, I talked about a weird gig that I had on Facebook, and I asked everybody to share their stories of their weirdest gigs. And you played a dog's birthday party right when you first moved to New York, right?
Yeah, pretty soon. One of the mistakes I made was my roommate was a bass player. So we moved to New York, moved into this little dump in Queens. And of course, him being a bass player, within about 5 minutes, he's getting calls. It's like How to Marry a Millionaire, that the Marilyn Monroe movie where these 3 women are in this apartment. All of a sudden, they're getting these. Oh my gosh, this guy just called me to tour the world. So he was getting called to work, and I didn't work for a couple of months, and finally this guy called me, and he said, I've heard about you, and somebody wants me to play this private party. I can't do it. Can you do it? I said, yeah. So he gave me the address. It was in a high-rise in near Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn. So I go there with my Fender Rhodes, and getting on the elevator with me is a photographer. And it turns out we're going to the same floor and so we go into the apartment, and he's setting up his stuff, and I'm setting up my Rhodes, and I look, and there are, around the doorway, there are all these birthday cards from dogs, Fifi and Rex, and this guy, he was this little pudgy guy. He had a little pudgy dog that had a rhinestone collar, and finally I said to the photographer, "Is this what I think it is?" And the photographer said, "Look, don't worry." Said, "I've worked for this guy before. He'll probably pay you more than he said he would," which he gave me an extra $100. He's cool. He's just, it's a birthday party for his dog. Well, mainly that was an excuse for him to invite all these humans to his place for a party. But the pretext was it was the dog. So I played How Much Is That Doggy in the Window, and I don't know, Dolphin Dance. I played a few Animal songs. Nobody knew and nobody cared.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog?
Yeah, ain't nothing but there was an old blues tune called Walking the Dog. I don't know. 6 months later, I got a call from him saying that he wanted to know the correct spelling of my name because he was having a photo album made of the event, and my name would be in gold leaf on the cover along with the photographer and whoever the dog was. So
man.
That's, pretty tame, but
yeah. Okay. Best pizza, Chicago or New York?
Chicago. But not all Chicago pizza.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, and I've thought about this question to me, this was one of the most important questions you were asking. There's some good New York pizza. I mean, mostly what I know is the place up above the Vanguard.
Rivoli.
Yeah. I went in there one night. I wasn't in the band by this time. I went in there to order a slice before going down to hear the band, and through the floor I heard the band playing one of my charts. And it was too fast, and I quickly ate the pie and ran downstairs. It's too fast. But Chicago, I've had, unfortunately, there's a restaurant, there's 2 in Chicago. There's Pizzeria Uno and Due. Uno has become a chain. Mm-hmm. It sucks. It's an awful parody of Chicago pizza. So a lot of times people think they're getting the real thing at these Uno chain. No. It's not thin crust, but it's not real thick. It's about that. I don't know if you can. It's about that thick, but the ingredients are absolutely fresh, and there's a texture to the crust. It's just got a little bit of this crunch to it. So for me, still Due is. I go there. Well, I haven't been to Chicago in a long time, but that still is my temple.
I went for the first time 2 summers ago. We were playing the Chicago Jazz Festival, and I think we went to Lou Malnati's.
Malnati's, there's Gino's East, uh, and then Uno and Due, and then I'm sure there's a few others now because I back there were a time back in the early '70s. I was still down in Champaign-Urbana, and a group of us would come up to hear music at the Jazz Showcase or something, and then we'd go hang out at this other club, and then go to Due at 2:30, and it used to be open till 4, and you could go there at 2 in the morning, have a oh man, and it'd be 3:30, and you're getting in that car for that 3-hour drive down to Champaign. That was awful, but I haven't really been the last time I was there was in the early, it was around 2009.
Mm-hmm.
I played there with Phil Woods. We stayed in a hotel across the kitty corner from Dewey's. I ate every meal.
Now I have a new place to go that I have to try.
Yeah, it's Wabash and Ohio Street.
If you can only pick one, out of tune piano or out of tune band?
Out of tune band.
Can you compose on an out of tune piano?
Yeah, I have. I'd rather have it in tune, and I've heard out of tune bands that sound great. Ellington's sax section wasn't the greatest intonation. Man,
what's your favorite club outside of New York City?
I'd have to say the Jazz Color in Frankfurt. It's this little place in the basement. It was started there in, I think, 1965, when that part of Frankfurt had been bombed to smithereens, and these jazz guys, they wanted to start a place, and the building above was gone, but the basement was still intact.
Oh, so they made a jazz club out of it.
Yeah, and it's still there, and it reminds me of the Vanguard, but it's even smaller. It's a little smaller than the Vanguard, but it's just straight ahead jazz club. It's even less, the chairs at the Vanguard are even more comfortable than the chairs at, and you could never fit a big band. They can't do more than about a sextet on the stage there. But it's.
So you've played there.
I've played there many times. I've hung out there many times.
Yeah.
And it's a great club. It's what I call old Europe. It's these clubs I used to play when I was with Stan Getz in the early '80s. A lot of them are gone, and it's just these little joints, and they're keeping going.
What's your favorite club in New York?
Vanguard.
I knew that would be easy.
I've played Birdland. I like Birdland. I've played the Jazz Standard. I like that. Played a lot of other places, and but there's something about especially for for that big band, it's like the perfect glove for the hand. I mean, it just fits wonderfully, and the sound is great.
Yeah. I don't go to the Vanguard as often as I want to, but that's something that always strikes me, that the sound is perfect.
Yeah.
That band can wail, but doesn't overwhelm.
You've got enough reflective surfaces out in the room, but there's a big curtain in back of the band, so that absorbs some of the sound. And I don't know if you know this, but if when you look if you're on the bandstand, you look at the back of the club, the wall, I don't know if you can see, the wall curves down like that.
I didn't know that.
And if you sit on the back bench, you can hear conversations up on the trumpet section. It's the acoustics. The sound travels and comes down that wall.
That's dangerous because we all know trumpet players are
I know.
the worst behaved.
I know.
Hopefully this will be an easy question for you. Best instrument in the band?
Bass trombone. I mean, there's no argument.
I also thought I would throw this out there: the best mustache in jazz.
Okay, well, given who I'm talking to, I'm going to divide my answer: living and dead. Living is John Fedchuk. Dead is Manny Albam. It was fantastic. Yeah, I've got some pictures. I used to have a big mustache. It was pretty good.
Do you have any projects that you're currently working on, or anything that people should keep an ear or an eye out for?
No. No. Well, yeah. I'm I've got a number of irons in the fire for the Frankfurt band whenever that cranks up again. And with the Vanguard Orchestra, we've been talking about doing another CD of my music. It's been 15 years.
Too long.
Yeah, and I've written about half the music, and right now I'm working on it. I'm using this time to to work on it, and so that's the next thing I'm really working on. So and other than that, no, that's really the Vanguard thing, and then the stuff for Europe. And there was I was involved with a thing with Ambrose Akinmusire. We were going to be at Jazz at Lincoln Center in March, and that got shut down not just a few days before it was going to happen. I'm hoping that happens again, because that music was really interesting. And yeah, and he was a student at MSM, and then we did a thing a couple of years ago with the Frankfurt Radio Band, and I arranged a bunch of his tunes. And he's a remarkable musician, and plays all kinds of different ways. I mean, it's really hard to pigeonhole this guy.
That program in Berkeley that he came out of is really good. I have a friend that teaches for Berkeley High School. And speaking of high school, I have to ask if you have ever played football. I have always had a story I've told myself in my head about you, that you were a football player, but you got lost on the way to the field and found a piano instead.
Well, when I was in high school, I was a freshman in high school, and the football coach wanted me to try out for the team. But I also, I was playing clarinet, and I wanted to be in the band. And the problem was the football team practiced the same time that the band rehearsed, and I couldn't do both. And I remember my dad said, well, you can play football and have fun for a few years, or you could do music and have fun for the rest of your life.
Wow, that's deep.
That's what happened. And he was right. Worked out.
I should say so. It's really incredible that you had such supportive parents. Not everybody has those, and look at where he got you.
Yeah, I was very thrilled. In fact, the last time I saw my mother, I played in Chicago with Thad and Mel. We were at the Jazz Showcase, and she came with my dad, and then one night later, she died. Moved to New York. I was playing, dog birthday parties and all these kinds of dumb gigs, and I'd write back and say, everything's fine, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here? And finally, I was glad that she was able to see me play with like a world-class band, and die knowing that at least things were starting to look up. But it's important to have that. I've known people that you can hear. It's like you hear the bitterness in every note they play. It's like, fuck you, Dad. Wanted me to be a lawyer, huh? So, yeah, we were lucky.
Thank you so much for allowing me to pick your brain for so long. You're one of the coolest cats I've met in New York, and I'm so thankful I got a chance to work with you even for a short time.
Oh, yeah.
I do know your birthday's coming up on the 18th, and so I'm going to start celebrating my birthday on the 16th and just continue right through your birthday on the 18th.
Ah.
And have an amazing day.
Thanks, you too. I'll think of you.